The diary page was old, yellowed like a bad tooth, and it trembled in the faint winter breeze that slipped through the cracks of the cabin wall. The ink was faded, but the words were clear. The Blackwood family shall never have heirs. That is the curse from the war and the price for what we have done. Snow was falling hard across Montana, thick sheets of white bearing the world in a cold, unforgiving silence. Through that veil of snow, a young woman stood alone, her face hidden by a thick wool scarf, a small bundle cradled in her arms. She stood before a simple, snow-dusted grave marker. An old woman's voice seemed to echo on the wind itself. "I once believed fate was set in stone," it said, "until love broke the curse." The young woman knelt, her breath a small cloud in the freezing air. She placed a silver pocket watch on the headstone. The metal gleamed, a single point of light in the gray gloom. She hesitated, her gloved fingers lingering on the watch, as if she couldn't bear to part with it. And just as quickly as the vision appeared, it was gone. Montana Territory, 1885. This was a land still raw, untamed. Rolling hills gave way to the sharp, snow-capped peaks of the Rocky Mountains, a jagged line drawn against the sky. Civilization was just a rumor here, a fragile foothold in a vast wilderness. The Blackwood Ranch was a testament to one man's stubbornness, a refusal to surrender to the land or to himself. Inside the creaking ranch house, Eleanor Blackwood placed another log on the fire. The flames leaped, hungry. She was only 19, but she had a quiet strength that felt much older. Out here, you got strong or you got buried. There was no in-between. Her auburn hair was pulled back in a tight, practical braid, but a few wild strands had escaped, framing a face that was a strange mix of delicate features and fierce determination. Her hands, though small, were calloused from work. The house groaned as the autumn wind pushed against it. Eleanor glanced at the window. The shadows were getting long. Her father would be home soon, and experience had taught her to be ready when Captain William Blackwood walked through that door. Her eyes drifted to the mantelpiece above the hearth. A silver pocket watch caught the firelight, winking at her. She paused, drawn to it, the way she always was. It had been her mother's, the only thing she had left of the woman who died when she was just 10. She reached for it. The metal was cool against her skin. She opened the case, her finger tracing the words engraved inside. "The truth shall set you free." Her mother's motto, or so her father said in his rare, clear moments. Eleanor never quite understood what truth needed freeing, but she held on to the words like a prayer. The sound of hoofbeats outside shattered the quiet. She snapped the watch shut, quickly putting it back in its place. She straightened her apron just as the scrape of boots sounded on the porch. Captain William Blackwood entered the room like a blizzard, cold and sudden, filling the space with his presence. He was once a commanding officer in the Union Army, and he still carried himself like one, even with the stoop in his shoulders and the gray streaking his dark hair. His face was a roadmap of hardship. His eyes, the same deep blue as Eleanor's, held shadows that the firelight couldn't touch. "Evening, Father," she said, her voice even. He grunted, hanging his coat by the door. She could already smell the whiskey on him. It was always there, a bitter perfume. But he seemed steadier than usual, which meant he'd only just started drinking. A small mercy. "Dinner's nearly ready," she said, turning to the stove. "Not hungry," he grunted, slumping into his worn armchair by the fire. "Got a letter from the bank. Mortgage is due." Eleanor's heart sank. It was the same story every season. The ranch was drowning, harsh winters, bad cattle prices, and a father who managed his bottle better than he managed his land. They'd already sold off half their acreage, most of their herd. All they had left was debt and pride. "I'll see if Mrs. Peterson needs more help with laundry," she offered, keeping her voice light. "Or maybe Dr. Miller needs assistance." "No daughter of mine is scrubbing other people's floors?" He cut her off, his voice sharp as broken glass. "The Blackwoods have their pride." Eleanor bit her tongue. Pride wouldn't keep the roof over their heads. She'd been helping both of them for months, secretly. She used the money for flour and salt, things her father no longer provided. Dr. Miller had even been teaching her medicine, letting her read his books. That knowledge was worth more to her than the few coins she earned. William reached for the whiskey bottle he kept by his chair. He poured a generous amount into a dirty glass. "I've made arrangements," he said after a long swallow. Eleanor waited. His arrangements were rarely good news. "Bought a horse. A war horse. Thoroughbred. Bloodlines from Kentucky. Cost me nearly everything we had left." Eleanor froze. Nearly everything. That meant he'd gambled the mortgage money. A cold dread washed over her. "That horse," William said, a desperate, familiar gleam in his eye, "will be worth 5 times what I paid. Once I train him. I'm calling him Captain's Redemption. He's going to turn everything around." She'd heard it all before. The prize bull that was supposed to save them, dead from a fever in 3 weeks. The new farming method that failed in the rocky soil. The mining shares that turned out to be worthless. Every failed dream drove him deeper into the bottle. "Where is this horse?" she asked, her voice carefully neutral. "Being delivered tomorrow. Special arrangement. Cavalry officer passing through. Man named Edwards." William took another drink. "The horse is spirited, needs a firm hand." Spirited. That was her father's word for dangerous. "Father, perhaps we should consider other options," she began. "The Hendersons are looking for help." "We are not selling this land," he roared, slamming his glass down. Whiskey sloshed over the rim. "This is Blackwood land, our legacy." "A legacy needs someone to pass it on to," Eleanor said quietly. It was an old argument, a raw nerve she usually avoided. His face darkened. "The Blackwood line ends with us, Eleanor. You know that." "Because of your curse," she said, the words tasting like ash. "It's just superstition, Father." "It is not superstition," he bellowed, surging to his feet. His shadow danced on the wall, huge and menacing. "The Blackwood curse is as real as this damned dirt. Our blood is tainted. It has to end." In these moments, she saw the battlefield that still raged inside his head. The war had ended 20 years ago, but for Captain William Blackwood, it was never over. "Every Blackwood who has tried to have a family has been punished," he said, his voice dropping to a haunted whisper. "Your grandfather, his brother, my cousins, all of them lost their wives in childbirth. Your mother, she was the last." She'd heard the story 1,000 times. The Blackwoods were cursed during the war for some unspoken sin. Any attempt to continue the bloodline brought only death. It was why he'd driven away every young man from town who ever looked at her twice. He was her warden, and his curse was her prison. "Mother died of a fever," Eleanor said gently. "It wasn't a curse." He wasn't listening. He was back there, in the blood and the smoke. "The Gettysburg Oath," he mumbled, his eyes looking at something she couldn't see. "Blood debts must be paid in blood." He sank back into his chair, suddenly looking old and frail. "No Blackwood will suffer that fate again. The line ends here. With us." Eleanor turned back to the kitchen, her movements mechanical. She finished preparing dinner, knowing he would eventually eat. The whiskey always made him hungry. As she worked, her mind went to the medical books hidden under a loose floorboard in her room. Books she studied by candlelight, learning about a world beyond this ranch, a world of healing instead of just enduring. Dr. Miller said she had a gift, steady hands, a quick mind. The local Cheyenne had even started coming to her for small remedies, trusting her more than the town doctor. She kept it all secret from her father, whose prejudices ran as deep as his scars. All of it was a small rebellion, a quiet fight against the curse that wasn't a curse at all. It was just a prison built by a broken man. The next morning, the ranch yard was filled with the sound of commotion. Eleanor was already outside, tending to the few chickens they had left. She watched as 2 men on horseback approached. One of them was leading a stallion, a magnificent black stallion. He was pure power, 17 hands high, with a coat that gleamed like polished jet. His eyes were wild, intelligent, and defiant. He fought the lead rope with every step, tossing his head as if he owned the very air he breathed. Eleanor understood instantly why her father had gambled everything. Captain's redemption looked like a savior, if you could ignore the danger that rolled off him in waves. William came out of the house trying to straighten his stooped shoulders. For a second, Eleanor saw a flash of the proud officer he used to be. "Captain Blackwood," the older man said, dismounting. Lieutenant Edwards, we spoke in town. William just nodded, his eyes locked on the horse. He's a fine animal. Finest war horse I've seen since the conflict, Edwards agreed. Trained for the battlefield, but his spirit's not broken. Still got fight in him. The stallion snorted and reared as if agreeing. Papers are in order. His bloodline goes back to a horse that served at Bull Run. The transaction was fast. Too fast. Money changed hands. Far too much money, Eleanor thought, her heart sinking. And then the men were gone. They left the Blackwoods alone with their new, beautiful, and very expensive problem. William approached the stallion, speaking in a low, cautious voice. The horse eyed him, nostrils flaring, smelling the stale whiskey that clung to her father like a second skin. He'll need a firm hand, William said, mostly to himself. Discipline. Eleanor watched as her father tried to lead the horse toward the stable. Captain's Redemption planted his hooves and refused to move. Father, she called out, maybe give him a moment to settle. William shot her an irritated look. An animal needs to know who's master from the start. He jerked the lead rope, hard. It was the wrong move. The stallion reared up in protest, its powerful body a dark silhouette against the morning sky. Eleanor moved without thinking. Let me try. Before William could argue, she was walking toward the horse, her movement slow, deliberate. She didn't reach for the rope. Instead, she started to hum. An old tune her mother used to sing, the battle hymn of the Republic. The horse's ears twitched, his wild eyes focused on her. That's right, she murmured, her voice soft. You know this one, don't you? Slowly, the stallion began to calm down. His breathing steadied. Eleanor just stood there, humming, offering her presence without a demand. Glory, glory, hallelujah, she sang softly. His truth is marching on. Captain's Redemption lowered his head, blowing out a long breath. The tension seemed to drain from his powerful muscles. William watched, his face a mixture of shock and something else. Pain, maybe. It had been his wife's favorite song, too. He responds to a woman's touch, William said, his voice strangely subdued. Like another soldier I once knew. Eleanor kept humming, moving closer. When she was within arm's reach, she slowly held out her hand, palm up. The stallion hesitated, then stretched out his long neck and sniffed her fingers. His warm breath tickled her skin. See? She said, finally stroking his velvet nose. He just needs patience. Her father's expression hardened again. What he needs is discipline. You can't gentle a war horse, Eleanor. It goes against their nature. He snatched the lead rope from her. The sudden movement, the sharp tone, it was too much for the already spooked animal. Captain's Redemption reared up again, pulling back with all his strength. William, caught off guard, stumbled forward, directly into the path of the horse's flailing front hooves. Father! Eleanor screamed, lunging to push him out of the way. Everything happened in a series of slow-motion heartbeats. Eleanor shoving her father, the horse coming down, a sickening crack, and then an explosion of pure white-hot pain. The world tilted sideways. The last thing she saw as she hit the dirt was the vast blue Montana sky, a beautiful, impossible promise of freedom. The pain came in waves, hot and sickening, stealing her breath. She tried to sit up, but her legs wouldn't listen. She looked down and saw it. Her right leg was bent at an angle that wasn't natural. Her dress was torn, the skin underneath already turning a deep, ugly purple. Her left ankle was twisted, swollen, broken. Her budding medical knowledge told her that much with sickening certainty. Captain's Redemption stood a few feet away, snorting, pawing at the ground. The fury was gone, replaced by a nervous energy. He almost looked sorry. William scrambled to her side, his face pale as ash. For a single fleeting moment, she saw the father from her childhood, his eyes filled with genuine concern. Can you stand? He asked, his voice rough with worry. She tried to move, and a fresh wave of agony made her gasp. I don't think so. My leg, my ankle, I think they're broken. And just like that, the mask slammed back down. The father disappeared. The captain returned. He looked from her, lying broken in the dirt, to the horse, and then he reached for his flask. "This is the curse," he whispered, his eyes going distant. "Don't you see? The Blackwood blood. It always pays." "Father, please," she gasped, the pain of fire in her bones. "I need a doctor." He took a long drink, his eyes losing focus. "She'll never forgive me," he mumbled, talking to a ghost only he could see. Not for this, too. A cold horror gripped Eleanor. He wasn't seeing her anymore. He was back on the battlefield, lost in some 20-year-old nightmare. "The curse takes everything," he said, his voice hollow. "Everything we love." "Father!" Her voice was sharp, desperate. "Look at me. I'm your daughter. I need help." For a second, a flicker of clarity returned to his eyes. He looked at her, really looked at her. "Those eyes," he whispered, "just like your mother's." He reached out a trembling hand, then pulled it back as if burned. Too much like hers. He straightened up suddenly, his voice taking on the clipped, cold tone of a military officer giving a command. He called for Parker, their last remaining ranch hand, an old man who stayed more out of loyalty than for pay. "Get her to the road," William ordered. Parker stared at him, shocked. "But Captain, she needs a doctor. Town's 15 miles. "She can't stay here," William repeated, turning his back on her. He started walking toward the stallion. "The curse follows the blood. She'll only bring more misfortune." Eleanor couldn't breathe. She couldn't believe what she was hearing. "Father, you can't." "Do as I say, Parker," William commanded, grabbing the horse's lead rope. "Take her to the crossroads. Someone will come along." "At least let me take the wagon for the doctor," Parker pleaded. William's voice was like ice. "The wagon stays. We need it for the ranch." She watched in numb disbelief as her father, her own father, led the $1 million horse away, his back straight, every inch the captain making a hard but necessary decision. But this wasn't a battlefield, and she wasn't a soldier. She was his daughter. "Parker," she choked out, fighting the pain. "My mother's watch. On the mantle, please." The old man's face was a grim mask. He disappeared into the house and came back with the watch, a blanket, and a canteen of water. "This ain't right," he muttered, carefully lifting her onto his own old mare. "The man's not in his right mind, hasn't been for years." The ride to the crossroads was pure agony. Every step of the horse sent a jolt of fire through her broken limbs. She bit her lip until she tasted blood, but she refused to cry out. That Blackwood pride, it seemed, was the one thing her father had managed to give her. The crossroads was nothing more than a weathered signpost in the middle of nowhere. One fork led to town, the other deeper into the wilderness. Parker helped her down, propping her against the post. "I'll ride for the doctor myself, Captain be damned," he promised, his eyes wet with regret. Eleanor shook her head. "He'll fire you. You need the work." "A job's not worth a life," Parker argued. "Please," she insisted, "just tell Dr. Miller where I am next time you're in town." The journey on foot would take him hours. She knew she didn't have hours. Reluctantly, he agreed. "Someone will come along," he said, echoing her father's cruel words. But his held a sliver of hope. He mounted his horse and rode away, looking back until she was just a small, broken shape against the signpost. And then she was alone. The pain settled into a deep, throbbing ache. The sun climbed higher, but its autumn warmth did nothing to fight the chill that was seeping into her bones. Hours passed. Not a single rider, not a single wagon. The world was empty. As the afternoon light began to fade, the true horror of her situation sank in. A Montana night was brutally cold. Without shelter, her chances of seeing the morning were getting slimmer by the minute. The irony was crushing. After all the years of listening to her father rave about the Blackwood curse, she was going to die because of it. Not because of some ancient hex, but because he believed in one. A self-fulfilling prophecy of the cruelest kind. She clutched the silver pocket watch, its weight a small, cold comfort, in her hand. "The truth shall set you free." What truth? The truth that her father had finally completely abandoned her. The truth that the Blackwood line would end, not with a bang, but with a whimper, alone at a dusty crossroads. Twilight painted the sky in shades of orange and purple, a beautiful, cruel backdrop for her last hours. She started humming again, the battle hymn of the Republic, the song that had soothed the wild horse just before it destroyed her. "Mine eyes have seen the glory of the coming of the Lord," she sang, her voice a weak, wavering whisper. Then a sound cut through the growing darkness. Barking. Eleanor forced her eyes open. A shape was moving toward her. Fast. A big dog. A German shepherd. He circled her once, sniffing, then let out a series of sharp, intelligent barks. "I'm afraid I'm not much company," she told the dog, managing a weak smile. The dog tilted its head, then it darted forward and gently tugged at her shawl. "What are you doing?" she started to ask, but the dog had already pulled it free and was racing away into the darkness, carrying her only extra layer of warmth. "Wait," she cried. "Please, I need that." But he was gone. A single tear finally escaped and traced a cold path down her cheek. The cold was getting worse. Her body started to shake with violent, uncontrollable shivers. Hypothermia. She knew the signs. She was dying. She clutched the watch tighter, focusing on the inscription. "The truth shall set you free." The truth! A faint sound penetrated her fading consciousness. Hoofbeats, distant but getting closer. A bobbing light. A lantern. "Hello!" she called out, her voice raspy with a sudden surge of hope. "Please, help me!" A horse and rider emerged from the night like a ghost. The rider dismounted, holding the lantern high. Eleanor blinked against the light, making out the figure of a tall man in a long coat. And trotting right behind him, looking very pleased with himself, was the German shepherd. "Good God," the man said, his voice deep and calm as he knelt beside her. "What happened to you? Who left you out here like this?" As he moved the lantern closer, she saw his face. It was a kind face, but a hard one, etched with lines of experience, salt and pepper hair, and eyes that assessed her injuries with a strange, professional calm. "My leg. Horse accident," she managed, her teeth chattering. He nodded, already taking off his own heavy coat and wrapping it around her. "I'm Dr. Jackson Montgomery," he said, his fingers finding the pulse in her wrist. "And you've already met Valor, it seems." Valor, the dog, sat proudly nearby, as if to say, "Job well done." "He took my shawl," she said, her mind still foggy. Dr. Montgomery allowed a small smile. "He's trained to do that. He brings me items with a human scent when he finds someone in trouble. He's a war dog, best tracker in 3 territories." His hands, gentle but firm, began to examine her legs. "These need to be set properly. I'm going to have to move you. It's going to hurt. I apologize in advance." She braced herself. The pain as he lifted her onto his horse was a universe of agony. She bit down hard on her lip, tasting blood again. But she didn't scream. "My practice is about 2 miles from here," he said, mounting behind her, holding her securely against his chest. "Can you hold on?" "Yes," she whispered, though she wasn't sure at all. They rode slowly, Valor trotting beside them like a silent guardian. "What's your name?" the doctor asked, his voice close to her ear. "Eleanor," she replied, fighting to stay conscious. "Eleanor Blackwood." She felt him stiffen behind her. A subtle, almost imperceptible change. "Blackwood," he repeated, his voice different now, colder. "Captain William Blackwood's daughter? You know my father?" There was a long pause, so long she thought he wouldn't answer. The only sound was the slow, steady plod of the horse's hooves. "I knew many men during the war," he said finally, his voice carefully neutral. "The name is familiar." She wanted to ask more, but the darkness was pulling at her, a heavy blanket of pain and cold. The last thing she remembered was the steady warmth of the stranger's chest behind her, and the unsettling feeling that she hadn't been rescued by a stranger at all. She'd been found by a ghost from her father's past. She woke up slowly, floating through layers of warmth and confusion. The first thing she felt was the softness of clean sheets. The second was the dull, throbbing ache in her legs. The third was the crackling of a nearby fire. She opened her eyes. She was in a simple bedroom, but it was clean and comfortable. A fire burned in a small hearth. The walls were lined with bookshelves. Through a window she could see daylight. She tried to sit up, and a sharp, stabbing pain in her right leg made her gasp. "I wouldn't recommend that just yet." Dr. Montgomery stood in the doorway, holding a tray. He looked different in the daylight, less severe, kinder. but his eyes were still clinical, assessing her. Your right tibia is fractured, he said, setting the tray down, and your left ankle is badly broken. I've set both, but you'll need to stay off them for several weeks. She looked down. Both her legs were splinted and bandaged. Thank you, she said, her voice hoarse, for finding me. He poured her a glass of water. Thank Valor. He's the one who found you. As if on cue, the big German shepherd appeared in the doorway, his tail giving a slight wag when he saw she was awake. He trotted to the bed and settled on the floor beside it. He's been checking on you, the doctor said, a note of affection in his voice. Appointed himself your guardian. Eleanor managed a smile and reached a hand down to the dog. Valor licked her fingers gently. How long have I been here? She asked. 3 days, he answered, his face growing serious. You had a fever the first night. I was worried about infection, but you're strong. You fought it off. 3 days. Had her father even noticed she was gone? Or did he just assume the curse had done its work? I should send word to your father, the doctor continued, watching her face. I'm sure he's worried. Eleanor looked away, shame and anger a bitter taste in her mouth. He's the one who left me at the crossroads. A long, heavy silence filled the room. When Dr. Montgomery spoke again, his voice was laced with a cold, controlled fury. He abandoned you? With those injuries? He believes our family is cursed, she explained, the words sounding weak and foolish, even to her own ears. He said my getting hurt was proof, that I'd bring more misfortune if I stayed. The doctor's expression was grim. I've seen a lot of things blamed on curses, he said quietly. Usually it's just men trying to excuse their own failings. Exhaustion swept over her again. The doctor noticed immediately. Rest now, he said, his tone softening. We can talk more when you're stronger. As she drifted back to sleep, she realized she was still clutching her mother's pocket watch. Through all of it, the pain, the abandonment, the rescue, she hadn't let it go. The next few days passed in a haze of healing. Dr. Montgomery, Jackson he asked her to call him, was a good doctor in surprisingly good company. He lived alone, except for Valor, in a small ranch house that doubled as his medical practice. I served as an army surgeon during the war, he told her one morning as he changed her bandages. Eleanor watched his face. Like her father, he carried the war with him, but he carried it differently. Her father was haunted by it. Jackson seemed burdened by it. Why did you help me? She asked him one day. Take me in like this? He seemed surprised by the question. You needed help. What else was I supposed to do? Many men would have just taken me to town, left me at a boarding house. He was quiet for a moment. Perhaps, he said finally, I recognized someone who needed more than just a doctor. Someone who needed a safe place to heal. Before she could ask what he meant, Valor barked outside. An arrival. That will be Grace Sullivan, Jackson explained. She helps me sometimes. I thought you might appreciate a woman's company. A few minutes later, Grace Sullivan bustled in. She was at least 70, with silver hair in a neat bun and eyes that missed nothing. She moved with the energy of a woman half her age. Jackson's a fine doctor, Grace said as she helped Eleanor change into a clean nightgown. But there are some things only another woman understands. Her hands were gentle but professional as she checked Eleanor's splints. Were you a nurse? Eleanor asked. During the war, yes, Grace confirmed. That's where I met Jackson. We were in the same field hospital, at Gettysburg. Gettysburg. The name hit Eleanor like a physical blow. The Gettysburg Oath, the source of all her father's madness. Grace saw the look on her face. That name means something to you. Eleanor hesitated. My father, he talks about the Gettysburg Oath, when he's not himself. A shadow crossed Grace's face. Many oaths were made on that battlefield, she said quietly. Some were kept, some were broken. The days turned into weeks. Jackson began teaching her, bringing her medical texts from his library. They would spend hours discussing anatomy, treatments, medicines. In the evenings, he would read to her by the fire, Shakespeare or Dickens, with Valor lying at her feet. A strange, quiet peace settled over Eleanor. For the first time in her life, she felt seen, cared for. One evening, she finally asked him the question that had been burning in her mind. Why did you leave medicine? The big city hospitals? He stared into the fire for a long time before he answered. I lost too many people, he said, his voice low. After the war, I practiced in Boston. I had a wife, Charlotte, 2 children. His hand tightened on the book he was holding. The influenza hit in '69. I couldn't save them. The great Dr. Montgomery, who had pulled so many soldiers back from the brink, I couldn't save my own family. I'm so sorry, she whispered. He closed the book. After that, I couldn't stand the city. I came west. Out here, people don't expect miracles. He looked at her, his eyes filled with a deep ancient sadness. I still heal when I can, but I no longer pretend to hold life and death in my hands. The war took something from all of us, she said softly. It took my father's mind, and it took your family. This curse your father believes in, Jackson said, changing the subject. Tell me about it. She told him everything, how her father believed the Blackwood blood was tainted, how any attempt to have a family ended in death, how her mother's death had been the final proof. She twisted the silver watch in her hands. He said the Blackwood line had to end with us. Jackson watched her, his gaze thoughtful. It's easier to blame a curse, he said, than to accept that sometimes life is just cruel. Their conversation was cut short by Valor, who suddenly shot to his feet, a low growl in his throat. Someone's coming, Jackson said, getting up. It was late for visitors. Eleanor heard voices at the front door, and then footsteps. Jackson reappeared in the doorway, his expression unreadable. You have a visitor, he said. It's your father's ranch hand. Parker stood behind him, twisting his hat in his hands, his face etched with worry and relief. Miss Blackwood, he said, thank God you're alive. He nodded gratefully at Jackson. The whole town's been talking. The captain's girl, rescued by the mountain doctor. He wrung his hat nervously. I've come with news, miss, about your father. Eleanor's heart hammered against her ribs. Is he all right? Parker looked uncomfortable. Well, miss, he's sober. First time in years. Eleanor stared at him, stunned. After you were gone, Parker continued, he locked himself in the house for days. When he came out, he smashed every last bottle on the property. Sold that new horse for half what he paid, just to make the mortgage payment. The old man took a deep breath. He's asking for you, Miss Eleanor. He says he needs to make amends. Says he's seen the error of his ways. Eleanor didn't know what to say. After all the years of neglect, the final, brutal act of abandonment, could she just forgive him? Should she? Jackson, who had been silent, spoke up. Miss Blackwood is in no condition to travel. I know, Doctor, Parker said quickly. I just thought maybe the captain could visit. Make his apologies in person? Eleanor looked at Jackson. It was his home. The decision is Miss Blackwood's, Jackson said, his eyes telling her he would support her, no matter what she chose. She thought of the man her father used to be, before the war and the bottle had stolen him. Despite everything, he was still her father. Tell him, she said, her voice shaking slightly. Tell him he can visit. In 3 days. After Parker left, a tense silence filled the room. You don't approve, Eleanor said. It's not my place to approve, Jackson replied carefully. But as your physician, I'm concerned about anything that might cause you emotional distress. She turned the pocket watch over and over in her hands. The truth shall set you free. I've been carrying this anger for so long, she murmured. Maybe it's time to set it free, one way or another. He looked at her with something that looked like admiration. You have a healer's wisdom, he said softly, and more courage than any soldier I've ever known. Their eyes met, and in that moment, something shifted, an unspoken acknowledgement of the feelings that had been quietly growing between them. The air crackled with a sudden intensity. Before either of them could speak, Valor whined, breaking the spell. Jackson cleared his throat, his professional mask slipping back into place. You should rest, he said, turning to leave. Good night, Dr. Montgomery, she said formally. Good night, Miss Blackwood, he replied. But as he closed the door, she saw the warmth still lingering in his eyes. Alone in the firelight, Eleanor clutched the watch to her chest. Her father was coming. A man she thought she knew, but now realized she didn't know at all. And she couldn't shake the feeling that his visit wouldn't bring healing. It would bring a whole new storm. The day of her father's visit was crisp and clear. For the first time since the accident, Eleanor was out of bed, sitting in a chair by the fire, dressed in a simple blue dress Grace had brought for her. She was determined to meet him on her own terms. Jackson was quiet all morning. She could feel his concern like a tangible thing in the room. "I'd prefer if you stayed," she told him, surprised by her own reluctance to face her father alone. He looked at her, a flicker of surprise in his eyes. "As you wish," he said with a nod. Valor came and rested his big head on her lap, a warm, reassuring weight. Just before noon they heard the sound of a lone horse approaching. "Remember," Jackson said softly, his hand brushing hers for a fraction of a second, "you are in control here. If you want him to leave, just say the word." The knock on the door was hesitant, timid, nothing like the man she remembered. Jackson opened it, and there he was. The change in her father was shocking. He looked like he'd aged 20 years in just a few weeks. His face was gaunt, his old captain's coat hanging loose on his thin frame. But his eyes were clear. The whiskey haze was gone. "Eleanor," he said, his voice a hoarse whisper. "Father," she replied, her own voice surprisingly steady. He stood awkwardly in the doorway, twisting his hat in his hands. He looked at her splinted legs. "They're healing. She'll make a full recovery," Jackson said from the window. William took a hesitant step into the room and sat in the chair opposite her. The silence was thick with unspoken words. "I've been sober for 22 days, he finally said. "I'm glad," she answered. "I came to apologize," he said, the words tumbling out. "What I did, leaving you, it was unforgivable. I wasn't in my right mind." His voice broke. "The curse, I believed in it so completely, a punishment for what I'd done. And now," she prompted, "now I see it was just an excuse, a way to explain my pain without facing my guilt." "Guilt for what?" she asked. He took a deep breath, and the story came pouring out. It began, as everything did at Gettysburg. He told her about his twin brother, Matthew, a man she'd only heard mentioned in drunken ramblings. They were inseparable, fighting side by side. On the second day of the battle, Matthew was hit, wounded badly. At the same moment, their flank was collapsing. "I had to make a choice," William said, his eyes pleading with her to understand. "Stay with my brother, or rally my men and hold the line." His voice dropped to a whisper. "I chose the line. I left my own brother bleeding on the field." The room was silent except for the crackling fire. "We held the position," he continued. "When I finally got back to the field hospital the next morning, he was gone. The surgeon told me his last words were, 'Tell Will I understand. Tell him I forgive him.'" A single tear traced a path down his weathered cheek. "But I couldn't forgive myself." Eleanor glanced at Jackson. He was standing perfectly still by the window, his face like a stone mask. "The night before the battle," William said, his voice ragged, "Matthew and I made a pact, a blood oath. We swore we'd never leave the other behind." "The Gettysburg Oath," Eleanor murmured. "I broke it," William choked out. "After the war, when your mother died, just like Matthew's wife had, I thought it was my punishment, the Blackwood curse." "So you abandoned me," she said, the words cold and sharp, "continuing the cycle." He flinched. "Yes," he whispered. "God help me, yes. In my twisted mind, I thought I was protecting you by pushing you away." He leaned forward, his face a mask of agony. "I have failed you in every way a father can. I don't deserve forgiveness. I only came to offer you the truth." He reached into his pocket and pulled out a small leather pouch. Inside was her mother's wedding ring. "She would have wanted you to have this," he said, his hand trembling as he held it out. Eleanor took it, a lump forming in her throat. "The rant," he said, standing up to leave. "I'm selling it. Too many ghosts. It's time for a fresh start. For both of us." He thanked Jackson for saving her, then turned and left. The sound of his horse's hoofbeats faded into the distance. Jackson finally moved from the window, his face troubled. "Are you all right?" "I think so," she said, her voice unsteady. She looked down at her mother's simple gold ring in her palm. So many secrets, so much pain. She looked up at Jackson. You seemed disturbed by his story. A shadow crossed his face. Gettysburg holds difficult memories for many of us, he said evasively. You were there, she stated. It wasn't a question. As a surgeon, yes, he said, his tone making it clear the subject was closed. Eleanor let it go for now. She slipped the ring onto her finger. It was delicate, beautiful. She had small hands like yours, Jackson observed quietly. Eleanor frowned. You never knew my mother. He stiffened, his expression suddenly guarded. I meant, it's a delicate ring. It would suit a delicate hand. It was a strange thing to say, a strange slip. Valor whined by the door, and Jackson seemed relieved by the interruption. He needs his walk, he said, moving toward the door. You should rest. After he left, Eleanor lay back, her mind spinning. Her father's confession felt incomplete, and Jackson's reaction, his strange comment about her mother's hands. She picked up the silver pocket watch. The truth shall set you free. She had a chilling feeling that the real truth was still buried, and that digging it up might be more dangerous than she could ever imagine. A week later, Grace Sullivan arrived, her basket full of fresh bread and town gossip. But today, Grace seemed different, more serious. Jackson tells me you're healing well, she said, but her sharp eyes were studying Eleanor's face, searching for something. He's been distant, Eleanor admitted. Ever since my father's visit. Grace sighed. Men and their secrets, she said. They carry them around like heavy stones in their pockets. You know something, Eleanor stated. Grace looked at her for a long moment. I know many things, child. The question is whether they're my stories to tell. If it concerns my father, I have a right to know. Grace nodded slowly. Your father told you part of the truth, she said, but he left out the most important part. Eleanor's heart began to beat faster. I was there, Grace said, her voice low. In the field hospital at Gettysburg, they brought in two officers, brothers, Matthew and William Blackwood. Eleanor held her breath. Matthew was wounded badly, chest wound. But Jackson was a miracle worker. He operated for hours in the worst conditions imaginable, and against all odds, he saved him. Matthew stabilized. Eleanor stared at her, confused. But my father said he died. He did, Grace confirmed, but not from the wound. While Jackson was finishing the surgery, a Confederate shell hit nearby. The shock wave brought down a support beam. In the chaos, Matthew's cot was knocked over. The fall reopened his wounds. He was gone in minutes. A cold dread crept up Eleanor's spine. Did my father know? That he survived the surgery? He knew, Grace said, her voice filled with an old sadness. He was there when Matthew woke up, just for a moment. That's when your uncle forgave him. She hesitated. What happened next? It's why Jackson won't talk about it. Tell me, Eleanor urged. After Matthew died, your father, he broke. He attacked Jackson, screamed that Jackson had failed him, that he'd broken his own oath to save his brother. He had to be restrained. The pieces started to click into place, forming a dark and terrible picture. Jackson had never lost a patient he thought he could save, Grace explained. Matthew's death, it shattered him. It was the beginning of a darkness that haunted him for years. And my father? Does he remember attacking Jackson? I don't know, Grace admitted. War and grief and whiskey, they can make a man forget things he doesn't want to remember. She looked at Eleanor, her eyes full of sympathy. Jackson knew who you were the moment you said your name. He knew you were the daughter of the man who blamed him for his brother's death. And still, he took you in. Eleanor's mind was reeling. A new thought struck her. Grace, did you know my mother, Eleanor Blackwood? Grace looked startled. Your mother's name was Eleanor? Yes. Was she a nurse during the war? Recognition dawned in Grace's eyes. Oh, my dear child, she murmured. I didn't make the connection. There was a nurse at Gettysburg, an incredible nurse. Beautiful, brave, skilled. She carried a silver pocket watch, just like that one. My mother, Eleanor breathed. She worked closely with Jackson, Grace said softly. They made a remarkable team. Grace stood up to leave, her face troubled. I've said too much, she said. Some questions are better answered by the people who live them. After she was gone, Eleanor lay in the quiet room, her world completely upended. Her mother and Jackson knew each other. Her father and Jackson shared a dark, violent past. She was caught in the middle of a story that had started 20 years ago, on a bloody battlefield hundreds of miles away. That evening, when Jackson returned, she confronted him. "Grace told me," she said, her voice quiet but firm, "about Gettysburg, about my father." He sighed, the weariness of the world settling on his shoulders. "I recognize the name," he admitted, "but your injuries, that's all that mattered." "She also told me about my mother," Eleanor pressed, "that she was a nurse, that she worked with you." He turned away, looking out the window into the darkness. "Your mother," he said, his voice thick with unspoken emotion, "was the finest nurse I ever knew. She was brilliant, fearless, compassionate. You knew her well." He turned back to face her. "We worked together for 2 years. I didn't connect you to her at first, but the watch, and you have her eyes." A thousand questions swirled in her mind. What was she like? How did she end up with her father? But before she could ask, Valor barked, his attention fixed on the window. Jackson moved to look outside. "Rider coming in fast," he said, grabbing the rifle he kept by the door. A moment later, they heard an urgent pounding. Jackson went to the door. Eleanor heard muffled, panicked voices. He came back to her room, his face grim. "I have to go," he said, grabbing his medical bag. "It's the Andersons, boy. Fell from the barn loft. It's bad." "Go," she said immediately. "I'll be fine." He hesitated at the door. "We'll finish this conversation when I get back," he promised. "There are things you need to know. Things I should have told you from the start." And then he was gone, riding out into the night, leaving Eleanor alone with a house full of ghosts and the terrifying feeling that the story was far from over. Sleep wouldn't come. The wind howled outside, rattling the windows. A storm was blowing in. Restless, Eleanor reached for the books on her bedside table. Her hand brushed against a worn, leather-bound volume she hadn't seen before. A journal. Jackson's journal. She knew she shouldn't. It was a violation of his privacy, but she opened it anyway. And there it was. Her mother's name. The entries were from 1863, from Gettysburg. He wrote about her mother, Eleanor Hayes, with a tenderness and admiration that went far beyond professional respect. July 5th, 1863. Eleanor insisted on working another shift, despite her exhaustion. "If there is any light in this hellish place, she is it." August 23rd, 1863. Eleanor has been reassigned to another unit. The news struck me harder than I expected. I have grown accustomed to her presence, her quiet competence, her smile. Eleanor's hands trembled. She flipped forward, past pages filled with the horrors of war. Then an entry from 1865 after the war was over. June 17th, 1865. "I saw William Blackwood today. He told me he and Eleanor have been corresponding. He asked for my blessing to marry her. What right have I to stand in the way of her happiness? If she has found comfort with him, I can only wish them well. Though the thought of her as Eleanor Blackwood, instead of Eleanor Hayes, brings a pain I had not anticipated. It hit her with the force of a physical blow. He had loved her. Dr. Jackson Montgomery had been in love with her mother, and her mother, it seemed, had chosen William instead. Eleanor closed the journal, her mind reeling. This changed everything. Was Jackson's kindness to her just a shadow of his feelings for her mother? A debt he felt he owed to a ghost? The storm broke then, rain lashing against the house. Valor suddenly shot to his feet, a low growl rumbling in his chest. Eleanor heard the front door creak open. "Jackson?" she called out, relief washing over her. "Is that you?" There was no answer, only the sound of heavy, unsteady footsteps moving through the house. And then, a smell that made her blood run cold. The smell of whiskey. A figure appeared in her doorway, silhouetted against the dim light of the hall, dripping water onto the floor. "Hello, daughter," William Blackwood said, his voice slurring slightly. "I think it's time we finished our conversation. About the Blackwood curse." William stumbled into the room, his eyes wild and unnervingly bright. Valor stood his ground, a low, menacing growl vibrating in his chest. "Father, what are you doing here?" Eleanor demanded, her voice shaking. His eyes fell on the journal in her hands. "Reading old stories, I see," he said, a strange, twisted smile on his lips. "It was all a performance, you know. My little visit last week. The repentant father. All an act." Alarm bells screamed in Eleanor's head. This was not the man who had cried in her room a week ago. This was something else. Something dangerous. "Why are you here?" she asked, her hand inching toward the bedside table drawer, where she knew Jackson kept a small revolver. "I came for you," he said, "to take you home, away from him." His gaze was filled with a mad intensity. "Dr. Montgomery, the great healer, did he tell you how he let my brother die? How he failed his oath?" "It was an accident," she said, her fingers closing around the cool metal of the drawer handle. He laughed, a hollow, rattling sound. "Excuses? And did you know about his own family? I found an old newspaper in town. Influenza epidemic in Boston. Wiped them all out. His wife, his children." He leaned closer, his breath sour with whiskey. "Don't you see? The curse found him too. An eye for an eye. He failed to save my brother, so fate took his family." "That's insane," she whispered. "Is it?" he sneered. "Did he tell you about your mother? About how he loved her? I always knew. And I knew she loved him too, before she chose me." "Why did she choose you?" Eleanor asked, trying to keep him talking. His face softened for a fleeting moment. "She said I needed her more, that he was strong, but I was lost." The hardness returned to his eyes. "Get dressed. We're leaving." He moved toward her. Valor lunged, teeth bared. In a shockingly fast move, William sidestepped the dog and pulled a pistol from under his coat. "Call him off," he ordered, the gun aimed squarely at Valor's head. "Valor, back," Eleanor commanded, her heart pounding against her ribs. "Father, please," she begged. "This is the whiskey talking." "Enough talk," he said, his voice cold. "We're leaving. Now." "I can't walk," she reminded him desperately. "I'll carry you." "Stop this madness, William." A new voice, calm and authoritative, cut through the tension. Jackson stood in the doorway, drenched from the storm, his face a grim mask. "Montgomery," William said, turning the gun on him. "Just in time." "Put the gun down," Jackson said, his voice even. "You let my brother die," William hissed, "and you let Eleanor die too." Jackson's face went pale. "What are you talking about?" "She wrote to you," William roared. "When she was dying after Eleanor was born, she begged you to come, and you never even replied." "I never got a letter," Jackson said, his voice raw with shock and disbelief. "I swear to you, William, if I had known, nothing on this earth could have kept me away." For a moment, William seemed to hesitate. The raw sincerity in Jackson's voice was undeniable. "She died calling your name," William whispered, the words heavy with 20 years of pain and jealousy. "Not mine. Yours." The revelation hung in the air, a shared agony. Jackson took a slow step forward. "William, you haven't lost everyone," he said gently. "Your daughter is here. She needs you." William's gaze shifted to Eleanor, a flicker of the father she once knew in his eyes. The gun lowered an inch. Then his face hardened again. "No," he said, raising the pistol. "No more lies. The curse is real, and it ends tonight." But he didn't point the gun at Jackson or at Eleanor. He turned it on himself. "No!" Jackson yelled, lunging forward. Valor leaped at the same time. The world exploded in a deafening bang. When the smoke cleared, William was on the floor, blood spreading across his shirt. Jackson had knocked his arm upward at the last second. The bullet had hit his shoulder, not his head. He was alive. "Father!" Eleanor cried, scrambling to the edge of the bed. Jackson was already on his knees, his doctor's instincts taking over. "The bullet went through clean," he said, his voice tight with adrenaline. He began working to stop the bleeding. William's eyes fluttered open. He looked at Jackson, then at Eleanor. "I failed," he murmured. "Can't even die right." "You're not meant to die yet," Jackson said, applying pressure to the wound. "You have too much to live for." William's eyes found Eleanor's. "I'm sorry," he whispered, "for everything." Then a sudden urgency. "The watch. Your mother's watch. You should have it. The truth." It's important. Jackson retrieved the watch from William's pocket and placed it in Eleanor's hand. Outside, the storm began to fade, the wind dying down to a whisper. The longest night of Eleanor Blackwood's life was finally over, but she knew the dawn would bring its own revelations. As the sun rose, casting a pale, clean light over the rain-washed world, Eleanor sat by her father's bedside. He was sleeping, sedated with laudanum. Jackson brought her a cup of coffee. They sat in silence, two exhausted survivors of the storm. "He really believed you got a letter from my mother," Eleanor said finally. Jackson's face was grim. "I never did." He paused. "But your father, he confessed something. Just before he passed out, he said he wrote the letter for her when she was too weak. But he never sent it. He couldn't bear the thought of her calling for me at the end. Another choice, another consequence. A man's pride and jealousy, masquerading as a curse." Eleanor looked down at the silver watch in her hand. "He kept saying the truth was important." Jackson watched her, an unreadable expression in his eyes. "Have you ever examined the case itself?" he asked quietly. He took the watch from her, and with a practiced thumbnail, pried open a thin silver plate on the back, a secret compartment. Inside was a tiny folded piece of paper, yellowed with age. He handed it to her. The handwriting was her mother's. "My dearest daughter, if you are reading this, I am gone. There is a truth you must know. Your father's heart is wounded by war and loss. He believes in a curse that does not exist. The true curse is fear. Fear of living, fear of loving. Do not let it rule your life as it has ruled his." The watch belonged to Jackson Montgomery before he gave it to me. The inscription was his reminder to me that acknowledging truth, however painful, is the first step toward healing. I pass it on to you now. With all my love, Eleanor Hayes. Blackwood. Tears streamed down Eleanor's face, her mother's voice reaching out across the years. She looked at Jackson. "The watch was yours." He nodded. "A gift from my father when I graduated. I gave it to her at Gettysburg. She had a habit of saying that phrase, 'The truth shall set you free,' whenever I was wrestling with a difficult case." His gaze was intense. "She was the wisest person I ever knew." "Did you love her?" she asked, the question hanging in the air between them. He didn't hesitate. "Yes," he said simply, "but she chose your father. I respected that choice." "And me?" Eleanor asked, her heart hammering. "When you look at me, do you see her?" He reached out and gently brushed a tear from her cheek. "When I first found you," he admitted, "perhaps. But since then, I've come to know you, Eleanor, a woman of incredible strength and compassion. My feelings for you are entirely your own." 6 months later, spring had come to Montana. Eleanor stood on the porch, her legs now strong beneath her. She watched as her father, his arm in a sling, but his eyes clear and steady, prepared to leave. "Denver's a long way," she said. "A new start," he replied. "Dr. Miller found me a job managing a stable. Honest work." He looked at the home behind her, at Jackson standing in the doorway. "This is your home now. Be happy, daughter. Live the life she wanted for you." He shook Jackson's hand. "Take care of her, Montgomery." "Always," Jackson promised. They watched him ride away, a lone figure heading toward a new horizon, finally free from his ghosts. Jackson came and stood beside her, slipping an arm around her waist. Over the winter, as she began her formal medical apprenticeship under his guidance, their love had grown, quiet and steady and strong. "I have something for you," he said, pulling a small box from his pocket. Inside was a simple gold ring. "I know we agreed to wait," he began, "but life is too short to waste time. Eleanor Blackwood, I love you. Not as an echo of the past, but as the promise of a future I never thought I'd have. Will you marry me?" Tears of joy streamed down her face. "Yes," she whispered. "With all my heart, yes." As he slipped the ring on her finger, the afternoon sun caught the diamond, sending a shower of brilliant light across their joined hands. That evening, they sat on the porch as the sun set, painting the sky in fiery colors. Eleanor held the silver pocket watch in her palm, its metal warm against her skin. The curse was broken, not by magic, but by courage. The courage to face the truth. The truth that love is stronger than fear. The truth that a legacy isn't about bloodlines, but about the lives you touch, the wounds you heal, and the choices you make to build a better future. The truth had, at last, set them all free. If you enjoyed this story, don't forget to hit that subscribe button and ring the bell for more tales from the edge of the world. You never know what secrets are just waiting to be uncovered.